Thanks, Michael. Is that close enough? Is that close enough? Audible? Thank you very much. Greetings from the Greens. Refugees are welcome here. In a post-Brexit world, refugees are still welcome here. Of course, we will respect the will of the British people, but we will not respect those elements across the country who do not respect the rights of people. So at the risk of the British people becoming inhumane, we will not respect that. And that's why we're here to express solidarity with refugees across the world and across the land. Now let me tell you, I was in Calais, the jungle so-called, not so long ago. And it was a very humbling experience to meet with people from Eritrea, from Sudan, from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Syria. Many of these people, many of these individuals were of course fleeing from our bombs being rained upon them, from our failure of Chilcot inquiry, from our despotic rulers killing people in order to save them. And we're not going to be having anything to do with that any longer. No! What did I find in those people in the jungle? An extraordinary resilience, an extraordinary community. Yes, many of them wanted to come to the United Kingdom. Where's the crime in that? To meet, to reunite with family members. Yes, many of them wanted to come to this country because guess what? They spoke English. And we should be proud of these people who are contributing to our country, who are fleeing from lands which we are co-responsible for, depriving them of their infrastructure. 20,000 Syrian refugees was Cameron's commitment over the next 5 years. What is that compared to the millions upon millions who are crossing their border into Turkey, into all those other lands around the conflagration which Blair has caused? What is our co-responsibility as European citizens towards those migrants and refugees? It is a damn sight more than we're doing now. It is unconscionable that we allow the Mediterranean to become an open cemetery. Alan Kurdi, what an unconscionable episode that we have children being cast onto the shores of the Mediterranean. This must not be allowed to continue.
You're here today. I actually went and checked on my calendar twice this morning before I wrote down that it's only actually been 2 weeks since we started living in this nightmare. Feels like a long time in politics, doesn't it? And I'm still in shock. I'm sure a lot of you are still in shock. I refuse to just get over it and carry on. We can't carry on. The world has changed. And there's been a despicable surge in racist violence and attacks on our communities. People who are among us today and people who are across the country who have suffered because racists have felt emboldened in the last weeks by a Brexit vote that was not on our terms, that was not on a fair debate on the arguments and the facts. It was a racist vote, and it has been used to justify horrific attacks on families, on individuals, on people from our communities, and we have to stand up against that. Whether we are in or out of the EU, we don't accept that. The far right have responded to Brexit. They are visible, they are organised, they are on our streets. We must organise too. We must be more visible, we must speak up more. It's not good enough anymore to just not be racist, you have to be visibly anti-racist. We have to organise and strategise. I'm sure that there are EU migrants and non-EU migrants here today, and I want to thank you for being here. Don't let anybody ever make you feel that this political situation in this country that you call home is not yours to fight for too. We need you by our side. We need to stand together, locals, Brits, migrants, refugees, EU citizens, all of us. We all have a stake in this fight right now.
UK in 2014. I was lucky, I got a scholarship to do my MA here. But my 18-year-old brother had to escape Syria, had to escape through a boat in the Mediterranean. He managed to send me a selfie from there. I have no idea how he got internet. And he walked all through the way to Germany. He had to do that because he had no choice. Because his brother, my brother, was detained 3 times, almost lost his life. Our friend was tortured to death. And our friends are still in jail there. 1 million civilians are starving to death there. Mothers cannot feed their children because they don't have anything to eat. And bombs are still hitting hospitals. Schools are still being hit. And children are being taught in caves and basements because the world has failed to act. So I'm here to speak for refugees' rights, but I'm not here to preach to the converted. I'm here to make you all uncomfortable. In April 2012, we were on the streets. We were a much bigger crowd than this. It was the funeral of an 18-year-old graffiti artist who was tortured to death because he had the audacity to paint anti-government slogans on the walls of his neighborhood. He was our freedom martyr. On that day, we chanted in our thousands, "Mother and Father of the martyr, we are your sons and daughters." At that time, we didn't want to be refugees. At that time, we didn't want to cross any seas. We want to continue our fight for freedom and justice and equality and the ability to stand here as you are standing here today, speaking for what you believe in. So when I see a sign, when I see a sign, I'm moving to Scotland or I'm moving elsewhere, I see, what have you seen? A Syrian refugee wrote a Facebook status after Brexit happened, and he said 2 weeks of political turmoil and people are leaving, and they asked why refugees are leaving, and they asked why are Syrians still fighting? See, Syrians are still fighting for freedom, whether they are here or in Syria. People who are still building hostels, people who are still building schools in Syria, despite being bombed every day, are still fighting for a better world. But the world has failed them. On the 1st of June, Syria Solidarity UK and allies picketed 10 days at this spot to hold the British government responsible to their promise to drop aid on 1 million besieged civilians because this man-made famine is happening because the dictator is not allowing food to get in. The government failed this promise as it failed many promises. So this is not a question about borders only. This is not a question about this is a question about where your solidarity begins. I heard a lot about Calais today. I heard a lot about detention centers. I heard a lot about baby Alan Kurdi. But today I want to ask each one of you, where does your solidarity start? Does it only start when baby Alan is drowning on the European shore? Does it start on the borders of Dover? Where does your solidarity start? Are you gonna be there for the people who are besieged, who cannot leave, who cannot be refugees because they are besieged in open prisons that are being bombed every single day? Are you gonna extend your solidarity to them or not? Borders are not just made of walls. Borders are inside your brains. Borders are inside politics. and borders are inside narrative needs a revolution that needs to rise up. I'm so disappointed that no more people are here. We need more people to fight racism. We need more people to stand for the people of the world. We need the chant in Damascus, in Aleppo, in Eastern Ghouta to be echoed here. We need the movement, the international global movement for freedom, peace, and a better world to be echoed here. This world needs to be one body, one heartbeat. Stand for humanity and bring ideas and values into action. Don't just stand by words. It's very easy to stand and speak here. People for their freedom are paying their lives. You have every opportunity to fight here. People are dying for what you have here, and yet we don't see many people fighting. So stand up, rise up for refugees, rise up for civilians in Syria, rise up for freedom and a better world.
Yes, talking about favourite signs, I think the favourite sign I saw recently was I prefer fromage to Farage. Well, yes, as has been said, I'm an Irish citizen, and we, as you know, have been coming to this country for centuries. We have been coming to this country for centuries. We are at the moment the second largest EU migrant group after the Poles. There are about 400,000 of us. And we've been in this situation before, back in the 60s, when Enoch Powell tried to deport migrants en masse and so on. There was a joke during the rounds, a rather black joke, which said the only reason why Powell hadn't picked out the Irish was because every Englishman had an Irish grandmother. And of course we can now see the reality of that with a rush for Irish passports at the moment, when lots of people are discovering that they do have Irish grandmothers. But we have to be very aware of what's happening with the rise in xenophobia, the rise in racist attacks and so on, much of it directed against EU citizens. Recently, I believe last week in Lewisham, a number of Spanish restaurants, Polish shops and a German business were attacked. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is the Pandora's box which the Brexit campaign has opened. And many of the people, of course, who've opened the box, having seen what emerges, are now running away and pretending they have nothing to do with it. But we must campaign vigorously against any indications of this, wherever we meet it, whether it's in dialogue, whether it's in conversation, whatever. In printed media, we must campaign actively against it. And this week, Time Out magazine ran 4 interviews with various EU citizens living in London. And there was a Spanish woman interviewed, and she spoke about what you call patronising xenophobia. People saying, don't worry Maria, you know, they might deport everybody else, but you're okay, you've been here for 23 years, you've got a nice job, and so on. And she wrote, I don't want personal protection. I want the laws of the country where I have lived, worked and paid taxes for 23 years to be fair to me, because I have the right to be here. And I think that should be our demand for all EU citizens living in this country. And I want to send a clear message to Theresa May, who considers it okay to use EU citizens as some sort of pawns in a perverted chess game with the EU. We are not prepared to accept that, and we are going to vigorously oppose that. But I also want to say to the Labour Party, there must be no backsliding on free movement. Any deal must include free movement. If there can be free movement for capital, there must be free movement for people. And to those Labour MPs looking now busily to the right, be warned, because we will be on your back over that. And as others have said before, we must work together with all progressive forces across Europe. We will work with our sister parties, but they must in Spain, Die Linke in Germany and others. We will work together to find a European solution to this and to oppose the xenophobia and racism of Brexit. Finally, I want to say...
Thank you very much for having me. What an excellent turnout. I'm here today because we have seen one of the most racist political campaigns in British political history. The EU referendum result has unleashed a wave of racism that we haven't seen for a long time. It has turned the clock back a long time for race relations in Britain. And it's important that we stand up to racism and we fight this racist backlash. And it's an inevitable consequence of decades of governments reducing immigration and asylum rights, stopping refugees and asylum seekers from coming to this country, stopping immigrants from coming to this country, and making it harder and harder to seek asylum and harder to come as a migrant worker in this country. So I think it's time that we stood up to the vile racism that we saw by Nigel Farage, which peaked at that Breaking Point poster, which was reminiscent of Nazi propaganda. In the 1930s, the Nazis produced an almost identical poster, except there were not Syrian refugees that were queuing up, that were pictured on that poster. It was Jewish refugees that were queuing up and pictured on that poster. So it's important that we stand up to this vile racism, just like we stood up to racism in the 1930s, in the 1970s, and in decades before. We've got a duty to stand up for immigration and asylum rights and to stand up to racism. I also want to say
about the attacks that are happening on migrant communities. Let's remember each and every one of their front pages for year upon year, targeting the migrant community, targeting the black community. But friends, we've been here before. I lived through the 1970s and 80s. I lived through when politicians would play the race card. I lived through when Margaret Thatcher stood in that building over there and she talked about people, the British people, being swamped by people of an alien culture. We lived through, even more recently, a mayoral election where the race card was being played by the Tory party. We know that that legitimises popular racism on the street, and that we, as the black community, pay for it with our blood on the streets. I've been to countless funerals of people, young and old, who were murdered in racist murders across this country. Of Kuldeep Singh Sekhon, of Akhtar Ali Baig, of Roland Adams, of Stephen Lawrence, of Joy Gardner. So many names that have been forgotten. But those names, those lives were taken, not just by the fascists, but because politicians legitimise popular racism. I lived through a time when our communities were constantly living under the fear of racist attack. And so we have lots of lessons to learn. And you know what the first lesson is? That we have to reject politicians who say that by talking about immigration, we take the sting out of racism. No, you don't. You popularise it. You legitimise it. We lived through when the Labour Party and the Labour government said exactly this when it brought in the Commonwealth and Immigration Act. I lived through a time where at Heathrow Airport, young Asian women coming into this country were subject to virginity tests to show that they were pure before they could enter. When families were divided, that didn't take the sting out of the fascists or the racists. What did it do? Emboldened them. Give them more, that's right. Absolutely, emboldened them. And what we've got to do is remember, when you echo their narrative, you not only legitimise them, you weaken us, you weaken our own movement, you weaken the values of our own movement. So friends, yes, Brexit didn't create racism, but it has legitimised it, as we can see by the real lived experiences of communities up and down this country. So for us as black people, and us as black communities, we have always said, we wear our passports on our faces. And when people talk about immigration, and people talk about the other, That's who they mean. They mean us. So, one slogan we had in the 1970s and the 80s, which I think is really relevant again now, was a slogan that said, here to stay, but also here to fight. But friends, what that means is that the progressive movement can't leave communities under attack to just defend themselves. So what we need now is a movement that simply doesn't say we're not racist, but says we're actively anti-racist. And that means solidarity with those on the front line of attack. It means solidarity with migrants and refugees in detention camps, both here and in Calais, in Greece. But it also means we need to build a progressive movement, a movement that understands our connection between what happens here and locally to what happens globally. And as we heard from our sister from Syria, it means a movement that at its core says it's people power and solidarity that will see us through, whose beating heart must be justice. Friends, we not only have to make another Europe possible, we have to make another Britain a reality, an anti-racist Britain. So friends, yes, we as a community have a right to live free from attack, but we also have a right to live a life of dignity, no matter what part of the world you're from. A right to life, a right to dignity, and a right to justice and equality.